"Move your filthy cows, you disgusting redneck trash!" Cynthia Bradshaw screamed this as her white BMW X5 barreled toward my pregnant heifers. The sound of her horn, a shrill European bleat, completely alien to the quiet of a Texas morning, sliced through the air and sent a ripple of panic through the herd. She thought because she drove a German SUV and ran the HOA for the new Creekstone Meadows development next door, she owned my land. She was about to learn that in this part of the country, the deed is king, and a piece of paper signed in 1940 carries more weight than a brand new luxury vehicle. I spent $52,000 on steel-reinforced concrete just to watch her life fall apart. And honestly, it was worth every single penny. It didn't start with screaming and panicked cattle. It never does. It started subtly, like a slow leak in a water trough. One day, there was just my 50 acres, the Broken Spur Ranch, bordered by 100 acres of undeveloped scrubland. My family, the McCoys, had worked this patch of dirt since my great-granddaddy bought it for a song and a handshake. The next day, bulldozers were tearing up that scrubland, and a fancy sign went up. Creekstone Meadows, luxury living, country charm. I didn't pay it much mind. People got to live somewhere, I figured. My land was my land, fenced and deeded. What they did on their side of the wire was their business. The first sign of trouble had a polished chrome grille and was doing about 60 down my private gravel driveway. The road runs along the edge of my property, a straight shot from the main county road back to my house and barns. It was never a public road. It was carved out by my granddaddy with his own tractor. The survey maps at the county clerk's office, yellowed and brittle with age, showed it clear as day, a private access drive, fully contained within the property lines of the Broken Spur Ranch. For a few weeks, the construction crews used it, but they were polite. They'd asked permission, and I'd granted it, on the condition they kept their speed down and repaired any damage. They were good folks mostly, and they respected the arrangement. Then the houses started going up, and the residents started moving in. And then came Cynthia Bradshaw. She was the president of their new Homeowners Association, a title she wore like a crown. The first time I saw her, she was stopped at the head of my driveway, her window down, staring at my gate as if it were a personal insult. I was checking the fence line nearby, so I tipped my hat and ambled over. "Morning, ma'am," I said, keeping my voice even. "Can I help you?" She looked me up and down, her lip curled in a way that assessed my dusty boots and worn jeans and found them wanting. "Is this the main access to Creekstone Meadows?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "No, ma'am," I said politely. "Your entrance is about a quarter mile down the county road. This here is my private driveway for the ranch." I pointed to the small, weathered sign on the gatepost that read, "Broken Spur Ranch, private property, no trespassing." She squinted at the sign, then back at me. "Well, that's incredibly inconvenient. The developer told us this was a community easement, a scenic route." I felt a cold knot form in my gut. "I'm afraid the developer was mistaken, ma'am. This road has been part of my family's land for 80 years. There's no easement." She gave a short, sharp laugh. "We'll see about that," she said, and rolled up her window. She backed her BMW out with an angry squeal of tires and sped off. That was the first conversation. I should have known then that a polite warning wouldn't be enough. For people like her, a suggestion is just a prelude to an argument they're determined to win. My wife, Sarah, a schoolteacher with a knack for reading people far better than I could, saw the whole exchange from the porch. When I came inside, she just looked at me and said, "That woman is going to be a problem, Bo." As usual, she was right. The next phase was a campaign of passive-aggressive trespassing. She wouldn't drive all the way to my house, but she'd use the first 100 yards of the driveway as her personal turnaround. Or she'd pull in and take phone calls, leaving her trash, fancy coffee cups and snack wrappers, on the ground when she left. Each time, I'd pick it up, my jaw tight. This was a war of attrition. She was testing the boundaries, seeing how much I'd tolerate. I decided to make the boundary a little less ambiguous. I went to the hardware store and bought the heaviest duty chain and padlock they sold. I ran it through the gate and locked it up tight. A gate that had never needed more than a simple latch for 80 years now looked like it was guarding a fortress. It lasted less than 24 hours. The next morning, I found the chain lying in the dust. A single link neatly severed by what had to be a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters. Her pristine white BMW was gone, but the tracks in the gravel told the story. She hadn't just trespassed. She had committed felony destruction of private property. I took pictures. I documented everything. I called the sheriff, a man I'd known since we were in 4-H together. He came out, took a report, and sighed. "Bo, I'll go have a talk with her," he said. "But you know how these things go. It's her word against a cut chain. She'll deny it, and without a witness or a camera, my hands are tied." He was right. He paid her a visit, and later that day she drove past my gate, slowed down just enough to glare at me, and gave a smug little wave. The war was escalating. She knew she could get away with it. That evening, I sat on the porch with Sarah, cleaning my grandfather's old Winchester. It wasn't about using it. It was about the ritual, the feel of the oiled wood and cool steel in my hands, a connection to a time when a man's property line was respected. "What are you thinking, Bo?" Sarah asked, her hand resting on my shoulder. "I'm thinking that woman has no idea what she's messing with," I said, my voice low. "This isn't about a shortcut. This is about respect. She's disrespecting my home, my family's legacy. So what are we going to do?" "I'm going to let her keep thinking she's winning," I said. "For now." I had started keeping a small notebook and a video camera in my truck. Every time she trespassed, I recorded it. The date, the time, the duration. Her smug face as she drove past my signs. I was building a case, brick by brick. Not for the sheriff, but for a bigger fight I knew was coming. The real crisis, the moment that turned this from a simple property dispute into something personal, happened a week later. I was moving a small herd of my best Angus heifers, all of them pregnant, from the south pasture to the north. It's a slow process. You don't rush pregnant cattle. You guide them, you talk to them, you keep them calm. The driveway she loved so much cut right between those two pastures. I had them halfway across when I heard the telltale crunch of tires on gravel, moving way too fast. It was her. The white BMW came flying around the bend. I immediately stepped into the middle of the road, holding up both hands. Any sane person, any decent human being, would see a man standing in front of a herd of livestock and stop. She didn't. She laid on that god-awful horn. The blast of noise hit the herd like a physical blow. Cattle are prey animals. A sudden, loud noise means danger. They panicked. It was chaos. The heifers scattered, their eyes wide with terror. One of them, a prize heifer named Daisy that was just a few weeks from calving, slipped on the loose gravel and went down hard. Another bolted straight toward the barbed wire fence. It was a stampede in miniature, a complete disaster caused by one woman's arrogance and impatience. I ran to Daisy, who was struggling to get up, her leg bent at a bad angle. The rest of the herd was a mess, running in every direction. That's when she had the gall to stop, roll down her window, and scream the words that started it all. "Move your filthy cows, you disgusting redneck trash." Something inside me snapped. The quiet, patient rancher disappeared, and what was left was pure, cold fury. I walked straight to her car, my hands clenched into fists. I've never hit a woman in my life, and I wasn't about to start, but I think she saw something in my eyes that scared her more than a fist ever could. I leaned down, my face inches from hers. "You listen to me," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but harder than any shout. "You have endangered my animals. You have damaged my property. You have trespassed for the last time. This is no longer a discussion. This is a final warning. Stay off my land. Stay away from my family, or I will use every resource I have to dismantle your entire life. Are we clear?" For the first time, her smug mask cracked. She saw I wasn't bluffing. She stammered something, her face pale, then quickly rolled up her window and sped away, leaving a cloud of dust and the smell of her fear hanging in the air. I turned my attention back to my animals. Daisy's leg was broken. My vet had to come out and set it. a costly and painful procedure. She lost the calf. The stress of the fall and the stampede had sent her into premature labor, and the little one didn't make it. That calf was from my prize bull Blackjack, worth thousands of dollars. But it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the principle. She had drawn a line, and now I was going to build a wall on it. The next step in her playbook was lawfare. 2 days after the incident with the heifers, a process server showed up at my door. He handed me a thick envelope. It was a lawsuit. Cynthia Bradshaw and the Creekstone Meadows, HOA, were suing me for blocking a public right-of-way and creating a public nuisance. They were demanding I remove my gate and pay them damages for the inconvenience I had caused. I just laughed. It was the most ridiculous thing I had ever seen. She was suing me for blocking access to my own driveway. This was the moment I had been preparing for. I thanked the server, closed the door, and called my lawyer. Then I drove into town to the county clerk's office. It's a dusty old building filled with the scent of old paper and history. I spent the next 3 days there. I pulled every deed, every survey, every plat map related to my property and the surrounding land, going all the way back to the original land grant from the state of Texas. I sat at a long wooden table, carefully examining documents that were older than my father. I found my great-grandfather's signature on the original deed from 1940. I found the survey from 1948, when the county road was paved, which clearly marked my driveway as Private Access McCoy Ranch. I found nothing, absolutely nothing, that even hinted at an easement, a right-of-way, or any public access whatsoever. While I was there, I got a call. It was Eddie, our mailman. Eddie's been delivering mail in this county for 30 years. He knows everything about everyone, not because he's a gossip, but because he pays attention. "Bo," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial, "I think I know what's going on with that Bradshaw woman." "I'm all ears, Eddie," I replied, stacking a pile of certified copies I'd just paid for. "Well, I delivered to her office, you see, the sales office for Creekstone, and I've seen the marketing materials she's giving out to potential buyers, and I've overheard some conversations." He paused, and I could hear him chewing on his words. "She's selling those houses by promising them exclusive ranch access. She's got it in her brochures, Bo. Pictures of your pastures, talk of private equestrian trails and scenic country drives. She's selling your road as a community amenity." The cold knot in my stomach tightened into a ball of ice. It all clicked into place. The desperation, the aggression, the lawsuit. She hadn't just made a mistake. She was committing fraud. She had sold a lie to a dozen families, and my gate was standing in the way of her cashing in. "There's more," Eddie said, his voice even quieter. "I see her mail, Bo. The official-looking stuff. She's drowning in debt, looks like a nasty divorce, and she's got foreclosure notices from the bank that financed the development. If she can't close on these new houses, she's going under. She's not just arrogant, she's desperate." That was it. That was the key. She had bet her entire financial future on a piece of land she didn't own. And I had the paperwork to prove it. I leaned over the fence of my own life, and thanks to Eddie, I knew exactly where her weak spots were. That's when I knew I had her. The lawsuit was a bluff, a desperate attempt to force me to give her what she had already sold. I now understood I wasn't just fighting a neighborhood bully. I was fighting a cornered animal, and I needed a cage, not a fence. Armed with this new knowledge, her next attacks felt almost pathetic. The day after I finished my research at the county clerk's office, a shiny truck from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality rolled up to my gate. 2 inspectors in crisp uniforms got out, looking uncomfortable. "Sir, we've received an anonymous complaint about illegal dumping of animal waste and contamination of the adjacent creek," the lead inspector said, reading from a clipboard. I just nodded. "Of course you did. Come on in, gentlemen. Let me give you the grand tour." For the next 2 hours, I walked them over every inch of my ranch. I showed them my manure management system, which was fully compliant with state regulations. I showed them the buffer zones I maintained around the creek, which ran cleaner on my property than it did upstream. I showed them my soil and water test results, which I conduct voluntarily every year. They were professional, but it was clear within 20 minutes that the complaint was baseless. As they were leaving, the lead inspector shook his head. "Mr. McCoy, I apologize for wasting your time. This looks like a model operation. Frankly, this complaint smells more like a grudge than a real environmental concern." I just smiled and thanked them for their diligence. That was strike one for her paper war. Strike two came a few days later, in the form of an animal control vehicle. A young, earnest officer met me at the gate, explaining he was responding to a report of malnourished and abused livestock. This time, I laughed out loud. I led him to the pasture where my prize bull, Blackjack, was grazing. Blackjack is a 2,000-pound mountain of pure Angus muscle and genetics, worth more than Cynthia's BMW. His coat shone like polished obsidian in the sun. "Does that look like an abused animal to you, son?" I asked. The officer's eyes went wide. We spent another hour looking over my herd, every single one of them, healthy, well-fed, and content. He left, even more apologetic than the EPA guys had been. The final act of her harassment campaign was the most public. She called the local news. A reporter and a cameraman showed up, and Cynthia gave a tearful interview right in front of my gate. The segment aired that night. There she was, looking like a victim, talking about the aggressive, uncooperative rancher who was denying families and their children access to community land. They showed footage of my private property sign, making it seem ominous. They portrayed me as some kind of local tyrant, a caricature of a stubborn old redneck bullying a new, vibrant community. Sarah and I watched it in stunned silence. My wife, the calmest and most level-headed person I know, was shaking with rage. "That woman," she said, her voice tight, "is trying to destroy your reputation, your family's name. This has gone too far, Bo." "I know," I said, turning off the television. The screen went black, reflecting our grim faces. "And I know what I have to do now." The time for defense was over. It was time to go on the offensive. The legal paperwork was my shield, but it wasn't a sword. I needed a sword, or in this case, a wall, a very big, very expensive, and very permanent wall. I went to my office and pulled out the old metal lockbox where I kept the ranch's emergency fund, the cattle fund. It was money saved over decades, for droughts, for disasters, for once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. I counted it out. There was just over $60,000. It was more than enough. And that's when I decided I was going to build the wall. She wanted to play hardball, to use lawyers and the media to try and steal what was mine. Fine. I would respond with something she couldn't sue, couldn't lie about, and couldn't drive through. I was going to respond with 12 feet of steel-reinforced concrete. If you're enjoying seeing this HOA tyrant get what's coming to her, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe, because you're not going to want to miss how this ends. Now let me tell you about the phone call I made that night. The first and only call I made was to a man named Big Mike. Big Mike runs a construction company that specializes in heavy-duty commercial and agricultural projects. He's a mountain of a man who spits tobacco, drives a beat-up 4350, and hates entitled, condescending people with a fiery passion. We'd known each other for years. Having done business on a few barn builds, he was the perfect man for the job. "Big Mike," I said when he answered. "It's Bo McCoy." "Bo, how the hell are you? Don't tell me you need another barn already." "Something a little different this time, Mike. I need a wall." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "A wall? Like a retaining wall?" "No," I said, looking out my office window at the driveway, tracing its path with my eyes. "I need a security wall, an agricultural security barrier to be exact. I want it to run the full length of my property line along the county road, and then turn and run 300 yards back, completely sealing off my driveway from anyone and everyone." "Whoa, hold on," he said. "You're talking about a serious piece of work there. That's a lot of concrete. What are the specs?" 12 feet high, I said calmly. 18-inch thick reinforced concrete. I want footers so deep you could park a truck in the trench. I want it engineered to stop a freight train. I want it to be the last wall it ever needs to be. Big Mike let out a low whistle. Son, that ain't a wall. That's a fortress. What in God's name are you trying to keep out? A white BMW, I said. He was silent for a moment, and then he burst out laughing, a deep rumbling sound. Say no more. I hate those things. When do you want to start? As soon as you can get the permits and the crew, I said. And Mike, I want to pay in cash. The planning session was a work of art. Big Mike came out the next day and we walked the property line together. He had a surveyor with him, and they marked out the exact line with bright orange flags, cross-referencing the certified survey map I'd gotten from the county clerk. We stood there looking at the long line of flags that separated my quiet pasture from the manicured lawns of Creekstone Meadows. It's going to cost you, Bo, Mike said, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. My initial estimate for materials and labor on a project this size, you're looking at north of 50 grand, probably closer to 52 when all is said and done. That's fine, I said without hesitation. It's a bargain for peace of mind. All right then, he grinned, clapping a hand the size of a dinner plate on my shoulder. Let's build a masterpiece. He told me the permit would be easy. Under county regulations, a structure like this on agriculturally zoned land, intended for livestock security and property demarcation, required minimal oversight. It wasn't a residential fence. It was a piece of farm equipment, legally speaking. He said he could have the crews and materials ready to go in a week. That's when Eddie the mailman provided the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. He stopped by a few days later, a bundle of letters in his hand and a glint in his eye. Big doings over at Creekstone this weekend, he said, handing me my mail. That Bradshaw woman is having a huge VIP sales event. She's got catering coming in, a bouncy castle for the kids, the whole 9 yards. She's trying to close the deals on the last 5 houses in the development. The flyer says it's this Saturday and Sunday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. I looked at Eddie, and a slow grin spread across my face. It was perfect. The timing was absolutely perfect. I immediately called Big Mike. Mike, I said, change of plans. We're not starting next week. We're starting this Friday at dawn. Friday morning, the air was cool and crisp. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. And then came the noise. Not the gentle lowing of cattle, but the deep rumble of diesel engines. At precisely 6 a.m., a convoy of heavy machinery rolled down the county road and pulled up to my property. An excavator, a backhoe, and 2 massive dump trucks, all bearing the Big Mike Construction logo. The crew, led by Mike himself, got to work with brutal efficiency. The excavator's bucket bit into the earth, carving a deep, wide trench exactly along the survey line. The sound of the engine and the rhythmic clank of metal on rock echoed through the morning quiet. It was a beautiful symphony of destruction and creation. It didn't take long for the Queen to notice the peasants were revolting. At around 7:30 a.m., Cynthia Bradshaw's white BMW came screeching to a halt. She jumped out, dressed in expensive-looking yoga pants and a silk blouse, her face a mask of pure rage. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, marching toward Big Mike. Mike, who stands a good 6'5" and is built like a brick outhouse, didn't even flinch. He just turned, spat, and looked down at her. "Ma'am, we're working. This is private property. I'm going to have to ask you to step back." "You can't do this. This is a community easement. I'll have you sued. I'll have your licenses revoked," she screamed, her voice cracking. That was my cue. I strolled over, holding a thermos of coffee in one hand and a thick file folder in the other. "Morning, Cynthia," I said, my voice calm and cheerful. "Lovely day for some construction, isn't it?" Her head snapped toward me, her eyes blazing. You are behind this. I will destroy you for this, McCoy." "Actually," I said, opening the folder, "everything here is perfectly legal." I showed her the building permit, signed and stamped by the county. I showed her the certified survey map, highlighting the property line where the trench was being dug. "As you can see, we are well within my property lines. This is an agricultural security barrier, fully permitted and approved. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a schedule to keep." She sputtered, speechless for a moment. Then she pulled out her phone and did exactly what I knew she would do. She called the sheriff. 20 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled up. The sheriff got out looking tired. He'd already had his fill of this dispute. He listened patiently to her hysterical rant, then walked over to me. I handed him the folder. He looked through the documents, nodded, and walked back to her. "Ma'am," he said, his voice firm, "Mr. McCoy's paperwork is all in order. He is building a permitted structure on his own land. You are currently trespassing. I'm going to have to ask you to return to your vehicle and leave the premises." The look on her face was a priceless mixture of shock, fury, and impotence. Defeated, she stormed back to her car and sped off. The excavation continued uninterrupted. By noon, the trench was complete, 4 feet wide and 6 feet deep, a massive scar in the earth where her shortcut used to be. Saturday was the main event. Her VIP sales event was scheduled to begin at 10 a.m. At 8 a.m., my reinforcements arrived. A fleet of 10 concrete trucks, one after the other, lined up on the county road, their massive drums churning. The noise was glorious. The first truck backed up to the trench, and the pour began. A thick gray river of concrete flowed into the earth, filling the footer trench and encasing the massive cages of steel rebar the crew had set in place. Right on cue, Cynthia's potential buyers started arriving. They drove their Lexuses and Mercedes past the long line of concrete trucks, past the noise and the dust, their faces etched with confusion. They saw the massive construction project, the army of workers, the deep trench being filled with concrete. This wasn't the serene country charm they had been promised. Cynthia was in full panic mode. She was running around, trying to direct traffic, trying to reassure her clients with a frantic, plastered-on smile. But the sight of that wall being born was impossible to ignore. It was a monument to her lies, rising directly between her fraudulent promises and the reality of my property rights. And then she snapped. The pressure, the public humiliation, the sight of her entire scam crumbling into a trench of wet concrete, it was too much. I was watching from my porch, sipping my coffee when I saw it. She got into her pristine white BMW X5. She revved the engine, a high-pitched scream of frustration. I saw her yell something at one of the buyers who was trying to talk to her. Then she put the car in drive. She wasn't aiming for the road. She was aiming for the temporary construction gate we'd set up across my driveway entrance. I think, in her rage-addled mind, she thought she could smash through it, drive onto my property, and somehow stop the concrete pour through sheer force of will. What she failed to notice was the large pile of leftover steel rebar and concrete blocks Big Mike's crew had strategically placed just behind the gate for reinforcement. She floored it. The BMW shot forward, a 2-ton missile of entitlement. It hit the gate with a sickening crunch of metal and plastic. The gate buckled, but it held, braced by the pile of rebar behind it. The front end of her expensive German SUV crumpled like a tin can. The hood buckled upwards, the grille shattered, and steam and coolant erupted from the punctured radiator. The airbags deployed with a violent thump, filling the cabin with white powder. The BMW was dead, utterly and completely totaled. It sat there steaming and broken, its horn blaring incessantly from the short circuit caused by the impact. And Cynthia Bradshaw sat in the driver's seat, stunned, defeated, and covered in airbag dust. Her buyers just stared, their mouths agape. Big Mike's crew stopped working for a moment, and a few of them even started to clap. I just took another sip of my coffee. The wall wasn't even finished yet, and it had already claimed its first victim. The aftermath of the BMW's kamikaze run was pure chaos for Cynthia and pure satisfaction for me. The sheriff arrived again, this time with paramedics and a tow truck. Cynthia was fine physically, but her composure was shattered. She was a hysterical, sobbing mess as they helped her out of the wrecked vehicle. Her prospective buyers, the very people she was trying to impress, saw the whole pathetic display. One by one, I watched them get in their cars and drive away, shaking their heads. Her grand sales event was a spectacular failure. The tow truck hauled away the carcass of her SUV, leaving a sad-looking puddle of coolant and oil on the gravel. The sheriff wrote her a ticket for reckless driving and destruction of property, the construction gate she'd rammed. The irony was delicious. The woman who had cut my lock with bolt cutters had just destroyed her own $80,000 vehicle trying to break a gate that wasn't even the main attraction. By Sunday evening, the wall was complete. The last of the concrete had been poured. The wooden form stripped away to reveal a monolithic slab of gray power. It stood 12 feet tall, an unbroken, impenetrable barrier. It was stark, brutal, and beautiful. It was the physical manifestation of the words, "No trespassing." It was the most expensive and effective no I had ever said in my life. Big Mike and his crew packed up their equipment, leaving only the smell of curing concrete and victory in the air. "Even a tank ain't getting through this," Big Mike said, shaking my hand before he left. "You let me know if you have any more problems with BMWs." But the wall was only the first part of the final act. The second part was the paper I held in my hand. While the concrete was curing, my lawyer and I had been busy. We assembled a comprehensive package. It contained everything: a certified copy of my deed in the 1940 survey, the 47 time-stamped videos of Cynthia trespassing, the police reports from her false claims to the EPA and animal control, photos of the cut lock, a copy of the new police report detailing her destruction of the construction gate and her own car, and the crown jewel, a copy of the Creekstone Meadows sales brochure that Eddie had given me, the one that explicitly promised exclusive ranch access and private equestrian trails on my land. We made several copies of this package. One was sent via courier to the district attorney's office with a cover letter detailing a clear case of real estate fraud. Another was sent to the state's real estate commission. And most importantly, my lawyer identified the families who had already purchased homes from Cynthia. We sent a copy of the package to each of them, along with a letter explaining that the amenities they had been sold did not exist, and were, in fact, part of a fraudulent sales scheme. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Cynthia. The new homeowners, now realizing they had been swindled, lawyered up. They filed a class action lawsuit against her and her development company, citing fraud and breach of contract. The bank that held her loans, seeing the lawsuits and the undeniable proof of her fraud, panicked and called in her notes. Her entire financial house of cards began to collapse. The final scene played out not on my ranch, but in the town hall. The town was holding a public meeting about community development, and the Creekstone Meadows debacle was the main topic on the agenda. The room was packed. The homeowners she had scammed were there, sitting together in a grim-faced block. The local news crew, smelling a huge story, was there with their cameras. And Cynthia Bradshaw was there, looking pale and haggard, ready to try and spin one last desperate lie. I stood in the back of the room, leaning against the wall, just watching. Sarah was next to me, her hand holding mine. Cynthia took the podium and began her speech, painting herself as the victim of a vindictive local who was trying to sabotage her beautiful new community. She talked about progress and shared resources. She didn't get far. A man stood up from the block of homeowners. He was a doctor, one of the first people to buy a house from her. He held up the glossy sales brochure. "Ms. Bradshaw," he said, his voice ringing with anger, "can you please explain this? This brochure, which you personally gave me, promises me access to a private road and equestrian trails. It shows pictures of that road, yet there is now a 12-foot concrete wall blocking that road. Did you or did you not sell us access to land that you do not own?" The room erupted. Others stood up, shouting questions, waving their own copies of the fraudulent brochure. Cynthia stammered, her face ashen. She had no answers. Her lies had finally caught up to her, and they had her surrounded. And that's when the doors at the back of the hall opened. Two plainclothes detectives from the DA's office and the sheriff walked quietly into the room. They moved through the chaos directly to the podium. One of the detectives tapped Cynthia on the shoulder. "Cynthia Bradshaw," he said, his voice calm but carrying over the din. "You're under arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, real estate fraud, and theft by deception." The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. The news cameras flashed, capturing her look of utter shock and defeat. The homeowners fell silent, then a few began to applaud, and I just stood there leaning against the back wall, a silent observer to the justice I had set in motion. I caught the sheriff's eye, and he gave me a slow, almost imperceptible nod. My work was done. The aftermath was swift and total. Cynthia Bradshaw was convicted on all charges. Her company went into bankruptcy. The bank foreclosed on the entire Creekstone Meadows development. The families who had been scammed were eventually able to renegotiate with the bank for a fair price on their homes, stripped of the fraudulent amenities. The story was all over the local news for weeks. Life on the Broken Spur Ranch returned to normal, only quieter. The only traffic on my driveway was my own truck. The only sounds were the wind in the trees and the lowing of my cattle. The wall stands to this day, a big, ugly, beautiful monument to peace and quiet. Sometimes, on a calm evening, Sarah and I will sit on the porch, looking out at the sunset. The top of the wall is visible in the distance, a hard gray line against the soft colors of the sky. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked me once. "The money?" I thought about the panicked heifers, about the lost calf, about the endless harassment and the attack on my family's name. I thought about the absolute profound silence that now filled our evenings. $52,000, I said. It was the best money I ever spent. It bought us peace. And you can't put a price on that. They say good fences make good neighbors. That might be true for reasonable people. But sometimes, when you're dealing with a certain kind of poison, a fence just isn't enough. Sometimes you need a 12-foot concrete wall to make a felon. If you enjoyed this pro-revenge, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from the ranch. And share this with anyone you know who's dealing with an HOA tyrant from hell. Lord knows there are enough of them out there.